Yeah, so consumers are still stressed, but interestingly, we're starting to see little storylines peel apart, unsurprisingly. So, for instance, when we talk the global consumer, last cycle, 11 out of 12 countries moved in lockstep. So they all moved in the same direction. Whereas this cycle, we saw a split. So seven got a little more stressed, five got a little less stressed. And so you're starting to see the specifics of exactly how, in particular, local politics, government politics, and conflict, and then, of course, the specifics of financials are impacting consumers. And so in the oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, just when exactly did you do this survey, just so I have an understanding of the
So
time frame?
we ran this survey about a month ago in June. For U.S. context, it was previous to even the debate. So as we think about politics, in some ways, I think it removes the noise of politics, the Trump assassination attempt, and the change over the weekend. But it was, that stuff is not factored in yet.
All right. So wait. So do you think, based on your results, do you feel like since the debate, since all of the U.S. political news, do you feel like anything has changed dramatically in your view?
Probably, we saw when we talked to consumers, 48% of American consumers said they were pessimistic about the country's political future, whereas about 28% said they were optimistic and the rest were just indifferent. And so I would guess we've seen those numbers switch around a little bit in the last month, but ultimately we still feel like the general theme on the consumer is the same, which is this feeling of resignation. So even though things are changing, there's still a lot of uncertainty. So we're seeing these persisting pressures with inflation, with interest rates, and then politics, not, certainly things are changing, but there's a lot of uncertainty. And that's leading to this consumer that feels like they have no agency or ability to impact any of the things that are going on in their lives. They're just subject to all this strife. However, as you noted at the top of the show, that doesn't mean they're not spending. So the reaction to this resignation, uncertainty, and frustration is manifesting in all different ways. And some of those ways are at the mall and at the stores.
Well, how do you explain the difference in behavior in terms of, we've had people on the show that say, don't listen to what the consumer says, listen to what the consumer does. How do you explain the discrepancy there?
Right, because they're spending based on
exactly.
and it is a backward-looking report, but
they're still spending.
Yeah.
It is. There's a couple ways to look at that. One is exactly how we actually try to analyze the consumer. So we have two separate consumer measures. One is called sensitivity, which is just voiced stress. So that's your more traditional consumer sentiment. And the reality there is, frankly, people will always say they're stressed. And so that's exactly what we are trying to offset with our other metric, which is around this idea of flexibility and agency. It's when I start to feel like I'm losing control, that's actually a leading indicator. So we're starting to see a little bit of that. One of the measures in particular within that is job security. So it's not necessarily the raw employment numbers or labor market numbers, but it's, do consumers personally feel like they have some sense of job security? So it's really trying to peel back some of those different layers to try to kind of assess that say-do gap that we see with consumers, pretty much across all topics.
How much of this can change? It's interesting. I feel like markets have gotten a bit more volatile. Economic data points can sometimes, whether we kind of seem to say that they're pointing towards a soft landing, it can depend on the day when we might get something that might kind of surprise us. Having this morning's GDP report. Having said that, in terms of consumer sentiment, how much can it swing, perhaps, from week to week, from month to month?
I think you're right that, frankly, with any consumer trends, they don't actually move in quite as dramatic of a fashion as we want to sometimes think they are. So think of any of the trends that you discuss over the course of your show, whether it's sustainability or health and wellness, all of that. They were slowly marching in a certain direction, but none of those things are happening overnight. And it's the same with consumers. So even when it comes to stress, one example of a recent election was in Mexico. And so the Mexican election had happened prior to us running the latest version of this survey. Now, we saw their geopolitical stress go down, but then stress in other areas go up. So you're almost seeing a shift in the pie rather than some massive reduction in stress. So I think the devil's going to be in the details, Carol. I think there are different stressors, but at a macro level, it's always going to be a little hard to see some big swings.